Hello and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM. This is a show where we just talk about games we love, games in general, gaming reviews, talking about role-playing games, board games, the whole nine yards. And today we're still focused on Savage Worlds. Sorry to everyone for missing on Tuesday. We will get the super-powered companion review back in the rotation. Good morning to Mark and John and Grom and Padre. This is a good morning. And yes, Rook, we are talking about mass combat today. So as I was reading through, I went to read through the mass combat rules to refresh myself with them this morning, and I discovered a problem with them. They weren't where I left them. My son, Zane, is on convalescence and has stolen my Savage Worlds my Suede core rule book and is currently making a ton of characters. Hey Bob, good to see you. And so I had to scramble for my backup copy of Suede, which is just awesome. Glad to have Zane as invested in Savage Worlds as I am. Morning Tink. So today we're going to talk about mass combat. Now we've already sort of talked a little bit about mass combat. Because you could use the quick encounter rules to handle a mass combat. Go check out our quick encounters video. It is... John Doom completely distracted me with that wonderful pun that earned him a Benny. Mwah. That was just beautiful. So yes, mass combat is in as in large-scale battles. And like most things Savage Worlds, they are focused more on the narrative than, say, Adventure Conqueror King, where you could play it out with tokens and minis the entire siege, the entire campaign. Now, even Axe has a high-level narrative version, but this again is focused more on the beats of the story than the actual swinging of every individual sword, which is great. It's a great way to kind of drop a set piece scene of a mass combat or a siege or a large battle and play through it. It's got a little bit more crunch than the quick encounters. So, and then I'm going to talk about ways that I am planning on maybe driving a pair of crowbars in between some of these mechanics and prying them apart to make it a little even more crunchy and flavorful. So, essentially, you need to have tokens while you're doing this. I recommend just using stacks of bennies for this. The stronger force gets 10, and the other side gets whatever is proportionally appropriate. So if they're outnumbered 2-1, the other side gets 5. If they're outnumbered 2-1, but they're, an elite undead revenant horde, maybe you count that as 7 tokens. And then every round in combat, your leader, your commander, is going to make opposed battle rolls. And there are different ways to get advantages or disadvantages into your battle roll. If you have the larger force, you get bonuses to your battle roll. If you have some sort of tactical advantage or battle plan that you have come together with, you get bonuses for that. So this really encourages the table to talk about what their tactics are. What's the battle plan? What's the goal? What is their ability to think strategically, and how does that help them? Now, depending on the results, either both sides lose force tokens, one side loses more tokens than the other, or one side only loses the force tokens. And the goal is generally to either reduce your opponent's force tokens to 0 or to get them to run. We'll get to get running later. But before you make that battle roll, you allow everyone else who's not the commander to very much in a quick encounters, a dangerous quick encounter sort of way, describe what they're doing. Are you leading a sortie? Are you counter-sapping? Are you launching the manacles at the opponents? Are you raining down fire, brimstone, or a hail of las cannon fire? everyone goes about making their rolls as normal. You make your rolls. If you succeed, your commander gets +1 to the battle roll, but you now have bumps and bruises, which counts as a level of fatigue that's a little bit more difficult to go away. If you succeed with a raise, you get to roll on a special table. You take no fatigue, and then you get to choose: do you give your commander a +2 to the roll, or the effect from the battle table? If you fail, nothing happens and you get a wound. If you critically fail, this is interesting. If you critically fail, you still get to roll on the battle effects table, which are all positive. And you give the commander on your side a bonus. However, you do so by brutally sacrificing your body. And you take a d4 +1 wounds. And I would argue, even if I'm playing in a setting with wound cap, there's no wound caps in mass combat. Every round is 2 hours. So if you take 5 wounds, you either soak them or you die. That is just the way it works. Now, the battle effects table is pretty interesting. You can do everything from inspire to terrorize your foes, become an army of one, and lay waste Conan style to the enemy forces. All of those affect the battle roll. They've got some rules, as Rook just said, for supply degradation. If you're a character with powers or ammo, you have to track them. In general, they say, right, 3d6 power points are used over the course of 2 hours, or 2d6 times your rate of fire on your weapons. So you can't last forever. Things are slowly breaking down, they're wasting away, you're losing your supplies. Whichever side loses the round of combat has to make a morale check, and the morale check, again, modified by some stuff. Go check out the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition core rulebook. We have links in the show notes where you can get it in PDF or physical form. But essentially, you have some modifiers to morale check, which is a spirit roll from the commander, and if you fail, you break and run. Sometimes it's an orderly retreat, sometimes it is a all-out route. You hold, next round of the siege or the mass combat begins. So that's it. That's the basic core of these rules. They're simple. They add a level of strategic complexity that's not too difficult to track. But they're missing something, I think, for me at my table. I would use these rules as written in a one-shot or a convention game, because I think they're brilliant for taking the core Savage World mechanic and adding on top of it. But as we've talked about, Savage Worlds is an eminently hackable system. And so for me, what I would want to do is I would make 4 to 6 points of interest every round to give the players something to latch onto. Is the enemy necromancer exposed that you can go and attack them? Does someone sap through the walls and now you have forces on the inside? Is there a chance to capture an enemy flag or take out an enemy commander? I would give those to the players as their what are you doing? They can do whatever they want, but if you target one of these special things, I would either drop out of mass combat and run that as a set piece encounter, or run it as a quick encounter, but have different penalties and bonuses depending on if you succeed or fail with that. So the fact that you go out and have a sortie against the necromancer, I would say, hey, this would actually be a full combat in the middle of this 2-hour mass combat. But if you take it out, they're going to suffer extra force wounds because the skeletons crumble to dust. However, it's a very difficult encounter and you may not want to risk that. So, I think there are ways to pry open each of these individual steps. Maybe make a battle result table specific to the forces that are encountered. Make individual round-by-round choices that maybe even are concatenated. Maybe before you can attack the necromancer, you have to get past the skeletal chariots. And so you don't tell the players that there's something next round that they could gain. But you give them these hints that these are major points moving back and forth in the battle. Maybe even add a Vagaries of War table that you roll at the start, 2d6 to see what changes. Do the rains come in? Is there an avalanche up the mountain? Did someone's food spoil and they have to end the fight this round? Or else they're going to take 1 force token loss each time. Are there reinforcements on the horizon? You got to break the army within 2 rounds or they get a new supply of force tokens. There are ways to add little tables to expand the complexity here, much like Rook is doing in the chat. So, well, now I've got to ask Rook, are you using the old mass combat that they put out in Unearthed Arcana? I ran a mass combat using those rules for one of my Tanar games that still remains one of the best sessions of D&D I've ever run. So, those are things that I think are ways to expand a little bit upon the mass combat. Oh, excellent. That's awesome. And again, the beauty of Savage Worlds is your players learn 1 mechanic. Trait plus wild die versus a target number of 4. And then from there, Savage Worlds in the adventure toolkit takes that simple mechanic and says, all right, now if you want to do this thing, here's how you build off of that to do this. If you want to do that thing, this is how you build off of it to do that. So if you go out and run a mass combat like Rook, I expect you on the Iconic Production Discord, server. We have a sub channel for Savage Worlds as requested by Tink and John Doom. Get on there, tell us how this worked for 5th edition. I do think the mass combat rules are probably the simplest rules to port to any other game. They remind me a lot of the Legend of the Five Rings mass combat table, where you basically said how far into the fight is your character fighting, and depending on that you had different tables to roll on to see what different effects. There were chances for honor, chances for glory, chances for death, chances to give bonuses or penalty to your opponent's battle roll. So Rook's going to put a document he came up with in the Iconic Production Patreon Discord. If you are not a member of the Iconic Production Patreon, please jump over there. It is at patreon.com/Iconic Production, and you'll immediately get a reward from Rook, which is apparently a document for using the Swayed Mass Combat rules in 5th edition. Awesome. Also, that you'll get access to a ton of the other things that we give out for our patron rewards. First of all, only patrons get to have access to the Exploring Glorantha for a week before it goes live. If you didn't catch it live, you get a chance to look at it going forward. For a week, you get early access to all of the Iconic Productions 13th Age 2nd Edition actual play podcasts, which we've just released another one to the patrons. It's going to be going live here next week for general consumption. We got one more from our first session, but we're recording our second session this Sunday. And yes, Rob Hainslow is joining us for the campaign. He's making his bard, so we'll see how Rob plays a bard. I don't know that I'm prepared for this. There's a ton of other great benefits. We give out videos. There's a Patreon game. And you get access to our Discord, which is wonderful. It is filled with great people having great discussions of great games. Tink just created the Churn, which is basically a place to post all of your random is the word I'm going to go with. Character ideas, character concepts, campaign, and adventure ideas. So it's just a potpourri of gaming goodness for you to steal from and use in your own campaign. And it's also there for stream of consciousness thoughts. Yeah, that's fair. So that brings our end of mass combat. Much like, unlike the siege, it was over quickly. We will be back on Tuesday with more Behind the Screen. And thanks to everyone who has supported us. The reason I keep mentioning the Patreon is the the Patreon and subscribing here on Twitch, following us on YouTube. It's how we get the ability to keep the lights on at the Iconic Production Studios. To everyone who subscribes, who backs, who is generous, who is a patron, and even to people who just show up in the chat and interact. Thank you. It keeps me excited and invested and able to do these fun things. Also, if you haven't yet, I know I've been beating this drum for about 9 days. Please check out the Amboria World Under Starlight Kickstarter, which is now a project that Kickstarter loves. We got that yesterday, which is just amazing. It helps the algorithm, which I hear is not actually about an ex-vice president's dancing ability, but is something that puts Amboria in front of more eyes and more people. So, check it out. We've got a ton of great stretch goals still to come. If you haven't watched it already, check out our, it'll be going live later today, the Amboria interview I did with Richard, where we talk about some of these stretch goals that are to come. So, until next time, from everyone at Iconic HQ, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming, and I will see you all on Tuesday. Have a good one.